All right, so let's talk about the beginning of chapter 2, that first half. And so it opens with a description of the Valley of Ashes. They describe that the Valley of Ashes is roughly halfway between the two eggs, so East Egg and West Egg, and Manhattan itself. And so it's this spot that the train tracks kind of run alongside the road. And they dumped ashes there. Remember, this is 1920 New York. So all of the industrialization that is happening, the factories that are working, the power that's being produced, they're having to consume coal or some kind of a resource. It leaves behind ash. They need a place to dump their garbage. Think about what a pile of ash would look like. Would it be solid? Why? It's flaky. And so there's always going to be this dust and this haze that exists. They describe that that's what this place is like. Everything is caked with this ash. It covers the cars, it covers the buildings, it covers the people. When you hear ashes, what do you usually associate ashes with? Fire. Anything else? How about death? This is what I want in your head. I want you to think about this place that exists between Manhattan and the two eggs as a kind of dead zone. We reinforce it by talking about this billboard that sits over it. Now, they don't use the word billboard because it didn't exist in the same way in the 1920s. We also can't picture a billboard in the same way that we traditionally think of them as being on taller poles and way up. That's more highway construction. That's going to come about later in the century. Instead, I want you to think of a large sign that sits by the roadside, but it's not super elevated. On the sign are two eyes and a pair of glasses. They say it's an advertisement for Dr. T.J. Eckelberg. He's an eye doctor. We've got to get this picture in our head of what's out here in this Valley of Ashes, because then they also say that one of the buildings here is a garage owned by George Wilson. Tom and Nick get off the train, and Nick says, we're going to meet Tom's girlfriend, his mistress. This was the woman on the phone in chapter 1. First, they meet George, who is her husband. He owns the garage. Nick says that the garage looks dead. There's a wrecked car sitting in the corner. There's no other business happening. He says the entire place is covered in ashes. And then when we meet George, how's he described physically? This is one of your questions. So if you did the questions yesterday, you should be able to tell me. All right. So what? Go ahead.
A blonde, spiritless man,
Anemic
and faintly handsome.
Perfect. Look at these 4 words. We know that the Valley of Ashes is this place of death. We say that George's garage looks as though it is dead. There's no business. And then we describe this guy as blonde. Are we talking a dirty blonde or like a white blonde? Huh? I want you to think white, as though the color is like almost non-existent. Why? Because he's spiritless. He doesn't have energy. He doesn't seem to have a soul. He's anemic. If people are anemic, it means they don't carry iron well in their blood, and so they're often thin and pale. And he's faintly handsome. I almost want you to think of George Wilson kind of like a ghost. Even in this scene, they describe that it's like people are walking through him. They're not really paying attention to him. And so George is described in this way, but then we should pay attention to the fact that his wife Myrtle contrasts him. How does Myrtle contrast George? Physically. All right, this is where I'm moving on. Let me be honest. You were supposed to do this yesterday. This is reading comprehension 101. How are they described? We spent a whole day talking about it on Monday. You can't do it on your own? Bye. See ya. We're moving on. They then go to New York together. Now, again, remember, Myrtle is Tom's mistress. So, yeah, Tom picked up his mistress right in front of her husband. He didn't seem to care because, again, we emphasize that he's this spiritless man. It's almost as though he doesn't know he's alive, they joke. As they go through the train station, Fitzgerald mentions that Myrtle changes her clothes. She buys all of this stuff and he catalogs it. This is another question that's there, but based on the fact that you can't describe Myrtle, my guess is you can't describe what she buys. But notice, she's coming from a place that isn't doing a whole lot of business. So is she spending her own money? Nope, she's spending Tom's money. So he had to wait for her because she had to change her clothes. Then, here we go. We're going to buy all this stuff. And then there's this scene where they pass a guy on the street selling dogs. Do you think this guy's a dog breeder selling them on the street because he's just trying to make a buck? No, he picked up stray dogs, has them in a basket around his neck, and is trying to make money because he's probably homeless. But he sees a sucker when they walk up, and Myrtle has that interest. Ooh, I want a dog. He's got him hooked. Look at how much he says that dog is. $10. 1922. So $10, good chunk of money. Myrtle asks a simple question. Is it a boy or a girl? Did you notice Tom's answer? You did. What's Tom say? No? Oh, I thought that's why he laughed.
I was just imagining how that situation happened.
So she asks, is it a boy or a girl? And the guy who's selling the dog tries to answer, but then Tom interrupts him and he yells out really loud. He goes, it's a bitch. We all know because we've been in middle school and we've gotten in trouble for saying the word and we've come up with this excuse. I was talking about a female dog. Ah! Tom's not talking about the fact the dog is female. Instead, this is a math equation. You have chosen to pick up your mistress. You got to wait while she changes clothes. And you know you bought those clothes. Then, as you're leaving the train station, this girl wants to buy everything under the sun. Are things more or less expensive in train stations? More. Then, on the way to the apartment, she wants to buy a dog off of a guy on the street, and it's going to cost you $10. Are you at all talking about the sex of the dog? No, you're talking about the situation. This situation is the worst. Oh my God, it's a bitch. And that's why he says it. He's not talking about the sex. He's giving you every bit of it. And what is he doing there? He's fulfilling Fitzgerald's characterization in chapter 1. Remember, Fitzgerald described Tom as having a hard mouth. Here it is. They go to the apartment. They sit around, and where we're picking up is as this party begins on chapter 34. They have described Myrtle's sister, who Myrtle calls over to be basically Nick's date. She said, "Oh, my sister is supposed to be beautiful." Let's reread. Let's go back to page 33 and reread the description of Catherine, who is Myrtle's sister here. The sister, Catherine, was a slender, worldly girl of about 30, with a solid, sticky bob of red hair and a complexion powdered milky white. Her eyebrows had been plucked and then drawn on again at a more rakish angle, but the efforts of nature toward the restoration of the old alignment gave a blurred air to her face. When she moved about, there was an incessant clicking as innumerable pottery bracelets jingled up and down upon her arms. She came in with such a proprietary haste and looked around so possessively at the furniture that I wondered if she lived here. But when I asked her, she laughed immoderately, repeated my question aloud, and told me she lived with a girlfriend at a hotel. Is she beautiful? What descriptions are standing out to you that are making you go, no? Her eyebrows. Now, I want to make sure everybody has the correct image here. She plucks her eyebrows, right? And she draws them back on. Is that common? Yeah, we see that. Girls do that. She draws them on at a rakish angle, though. So if it's rakish, it's sharp. But what's happening underneath what she's drawn in? Remember, Nick doesn't judge people. So often he words things in ways so it doesn't seem judgmental, but it is. He says, but the efforts of nature toward the restoration of the old alignment gave a blurred air to her face. All right, so if you pluck your eyebrows, what is the old alignment?
Like where it used to be.
Where it used to be. If you pluck your eyebrows, if you pluck any hair on your body, what's going to happen?
It's like the skin is like white.
Okay, but what happens?
Skin turns red. It's like mutation.
Okay, but even if you pluck the hair out, it grows back. And so if you look, the restoration of the old alignment is the stubble that comes back in. So Nick says she plucks her eyebrows and she draws them on, but he can see the stubble of where it's growing back in.
Oh.
What an attractive young girl. How's her hair described?
Sticky. Bomb of
Sticky.
red hair.
Anybody want to date a girl with sticky hair? Nah, especially if it's red. Take a look at her face. How's her makeup described?
Powdered milky.
Powdered milky white. Now, girls with a lighter complexion sometimes will put some makeup on to highlight that. But if it's milky white, anybody want to date a girl that's that pale? Especially if her hair is red? Ugh. Then, how much jewelry is she wearing?
So much that you can get from
Yeah. None of this is beautiful. None of this is attractive. But remember, Nick has told you from page 1 of this book, hey, I don't judge people. So he's wording all of this to tell you, hey, here's the facts. And he's almost making us go, oh, I get your impression, pal. Yeah. So we got to understand he's playing the game. He's not judging her, but at the same time, oh, he's judging her. Now he's going to talk about the other people that have been invited. He says, Mr. McKee was a pale, feminine man from the flat below. He just shaved, for there was a white spot of lather on his cheekbone, and he was most respectful in his greeting to everyone in the room. He informed me that he was in the artistic game, and I gathered later that he was a photographer and had made the dim enlargement of Mrs. Wilson's mother, which hovered like an ectoplasm on the wall. His wife was shrill, languid, handsome, and horrible. She told me with pride that her husband had photographed her 127 times since they had been married. Okay, notice here, Nick says, I don't judge people, but what are some of the descriptions that stand out to you that you're like, dude? Yeah, if this woman, if he says it this way, that she brags that she'd been photographed so many times, is that supporting that she deserves to be photographed that many times because she's good looking, or there's a little bit of a surprise to it? A little bit of a surprise. How's she described as looking? What's the word he uses? He describes her as horrible, and even before that as handsome. How many of how many of you would assume that handsome is a good word to use to describe a woman? No, it seems to say they have like mannish, squarish features. They're, man, that's a handsome woman there. Whew. So notice, Nick isn't judging. He's simply describing, but at the same time, he's giving you every bit that you could go like, oh, I got it. Look at how he describes Mr. McKee. He's a photographer, but he has to go out of his way to say he's feminine. He's a pale, feminine man. There's a whole lot that's unsaid here that Nick's kind of giving you about these people. He's going to talk through this chapter about the fact he doesn't want to be at this party, yet he's not going to leave. And he's even going to get so drunk, it is one of the drunkest incidents of his entire life. And so he's going to continue here. Just in case, we may get interrupted with a fire drill. If we do, down the stairs, over here at the end of the hallway, out the door, across the driveway, go towards the sidewalk. And on the sidewalk are numbers painted. Find the classroom number. I'll be there. He says Mrs. Wilson had changed her costume sometime before and was now attired in an elaborate afternoon dress of cream-colored chiffon, which gave out a continual rustle as she swept about the room. With the influence of the dress, her personality had also undergone a change. The intense vitality that had been so remarkable in the garage was converted into impressive hauteur. Her laughter, her gestures, her assertions became more violently affected moment by moment, and as she expanded, the room grew smaller around her until she seemed to be revolving on a noisy, creaky pivot through the smoky air. Okay, we're going to go a little bit because all they do here is talk nonsense. Skip about a page forward. Let's see. Actually, we're going to go about 2 pages. Okay, we're going to go where it says, the sister Catherine sat down beside me on the couch. So you're looking for a paragraph. It's a single paragraph, single sentence paragraph that says, the sister Catherine sat beside me on the couch.
Oh, it's like the middle page.
Middle of page 36. She's going to talk to Nick. Remember, her whole point in being here is to be almost like Nick's date. Do you live down on Long Island too? She inquired. I live at West Egg. Really? I was down there at a party about a month ago at a man named Gatsby's. Do you know him? I live next door to him. Well, they say he's a nephew or a cousin of Kaiser Wilhelm's. You know, that's where all his money comes from. Really? She nodded. I'm scared of him. I'd hate to have him get anything on me. All right, who's Kaiser Wilhelm?
He's the Kaiser from
During?
World War.
Yes. Would it be good or bad for Gatsby to be associated with Kaiser Wilhelm?
Probably.
Probably what? Good or bad?
Bad.
Bad. He's not. But notice the rumor here. People go to Gatsby's house, we're going to hear, but they don't actually know him. And all they do is talk trash about him. But notice that even here, she's like, I'm afraid of him. We're creating this impression of who Gatsby is before we meet him. They're going to continue here. Let's skip a little bit more because all they do is talk about pictures and ugh. Go down to where Catherine leaned close to me and whispered in my ear. It's about a half page on. Neither of them can stand the person they're married to. Can't they? She's talking here about Tom and Myrtle, her sister. Can't stand them. She looked at Myrtle and then at Tom. What I say is, why go on living with them if they can't stand them? If I was them, I'd get a divorce and get married to each other right away. Well, doesn't Myrtle like Wilson either? The answer to this was unexpected. It came from Myrtle, who had overheard the question, and it was violent and obscene. You see? Cried Catherine triumphantly. She lowered her voice again. It's really Tom's wife that's keeping them apart. She's Catholic, and they don't believe in divorce. Daisy was not a Catholic, and I was a little shocked at the elaborateness of the lie. When they do get married, continued Catherine, they're going west to live for a while until it blows over. You know, it'd be more discreet to go to Europe. Oh, do you like Europe? She exclaimed surprisingly. I just got back from Monte Carlo. Really? Just last year I went over there with another girl. Stay long? No, we just went to Monte Carlo and back. We went by way of Marseille. We had over $1,200 when we started, but we got gypped out of all of it in 2 days in the private rooms. Oh, we had an awful time getting back, I can tell you. God, how I hated that town. All right, a couple of things to point out here. First, why would Catherine assume that Daisy is Catholic? Because Nick says she's not Catholic. Like, that's a whole lie.
Daisy knows about the mistress and still doesn't divorce Tom.
Yes, there is that. But does Myrtle know Daisy? So would Catherine know Daisy? So who would be the one telling Myrtle or Catherine that Daisy is Catholic? Tom. What a great way to get around why you have to keep your wife as well as your mistress. Oh, I literally can't get divorced. Like, she's Catholic. It's against her religion. Nick's like, damn, that's a good lie. Man, Tom gets to keep his wife and keep his mistress. Huh. Then they start to talk about other things here. And Catherine shares with Nick this story about Monte Carlo. Do you know where Monte Carlo is? It's obviously in Europe. It's a big gambling city, is what it's known for, right? So it's like the Vegas of Europe, if you will. I just want you to look through the story she's telling. Okay? She even says it herself. She is a young single girl in Monte Carlo. She says she lost all of her money gambling. How do you imagine that a young single girl who's lost all of her money in Europe gets her way back to America? Huh?
She did that.
She what?
She did that to Tom.
Some kind of sugar daddy? She's turning some kind of trick. Notice that this is Nick's supposed date. Notice his questions right before as she told this story. Are they very long? Is Nick really engaged in this conversation? Because he's already done with her. And this puts the final nail into it where he's like, yeah, I'm not that interested in you. I don't want whatever you picked up in Monte Carlo. Now, they're going to start to talk here. And we're going to start to hear Myrtle talk a little more. And we're going to figure out why she and Tom are together. Because a lot of readers have a problem with that. They go, if Tom's rich and Tom's this physically fit kind of guy, why is he with Myrtle? We're going to figure that out. She said, I almost made a mistake too. I almost married a little kike who'd been after me for years. I knew he was below me. Everybody kept saying to me, Lucille, that man's way below you. But if I hadn't met Chester, he'd have got me sure. Yeah, but listen, said Myrtle, nodding her head up and down. At least you didn't marry him. Oh, I know I didn't. Well, I married him, said Myrtle ambiguously. She's talking here about George. And that's the difference between your case and mine. Why did you, Myrtle? Demanded Catherine. Nobody forced you to. Myrtle considered. I married George because I thought he was a gentleman. I thought he knew something about breeding. He wasn't fit to lick my shoe. You were crazy about him for a while, said Catherine. Crazy about him, cried Myrtle incredulously. Who said I was crazy about George? I never was any more crazy about him than I was about that man there. She pointed suddenly at me, and everyone looked at me accusingly. Oh, I tried to show by my expression that I had played no part in her past. The only crazy I was when I married him. I knew right away I made a mistake. He borrowed somebody's best suit to get married in and never even told me about it. And the man came after it one day when he was out. She looked around to see who was listening. "Oh, is that your suit?" I said. "This is the first I ever heard about it." But I gave it to him, and then I lay down and cried to beat the band all afternoon. "She really ought to get away from him," resumed Catherine to me. "They've been living over that garage for 11 years, and Tom's the first sweetie she ever had." Why did she marry George Wilson? Why does she think that he was a gentleman? Why does she think that he knew anything about breeding? How does the suit fit into this? So she mentions that George Wilson borrowed the suit they got married in. So George Wilson appeared to be a gentleman, appeared to know about something about breeding, according to her, because he was well dressed, because he seemed to come from money. And then only after they got married does she realize, oh, he's not. You're going to notice that she's going to talk in a second about her and Tom. And we're going to start to see, oh, now I see why you're connected. The bottle of whiskey, a second one, was now in constant demand by all present, excepting Catherine, who felt just as good on nothing at all. Tom rang for the janitor and sent him for some celebrated sandwiches, which were a complete supper in themselves. I wanted to get out and walk eastward toward the park through the soft twilight. But each time I tried to go, I became entangled in some wild, stringent argument which pulled me back, as if with ropes, into my chair. Yet high over the city, our line of yellow windows must have contributed their share of human secrecy to the casual watcher in the darkening streets. And I was him too, looking up and wondering. I was within and without, simultaneously enchanted and repelled by the inexhaustible variety of life. Now notice they're on their second bottle of whiskey. It's 1922. We're in the middle of Prohibition. This book will never acknowledge the fact that alcohol is illegal at the time, and yet people are drinking like crazy. From our background, we talked about the fact that during Prohibition, alcohol almost increased in how people were consuming rather than decreased. And so we see it as a presence here, but we got to remember, it's illegal. Everything they're doing isn't legal. And Nick talks about being within and without. He doesn't want to be here. He doesn't really like these people, yet he stays. And so he feels like, I'm a part of this group. We're all getting drunk together. We're all talking, but I'm not a part of this group. And I recognize that. I don't want to be here. He's going to now talk to Myrtle. And notice, this is later in the evening. They've had more to drink. Myrtle pulled her chair close to mine, and suddenly her warm breath poured over me the story of her first meeting with Tom. It was on the two little seats facing each other that are always the last ones left on the train. I was going up to New York to see my sister and spend the night. He had on a dress suit and patent leather shoes, and I couldn't keep my eyes off him. But every time he looked at me, I had to pretend to be looking at the advertisement over his head. When we came into the station, he was next to me, and his white shirt front pressed against my arm. And so I told him I'd have to call a policeman, but he knew I lied. I was so excited that when I got into a taxi with him, I didn't hardly know I wasn't getting into a subway train. All I kept thinking about over and over was, you can't live forever. You can't live forever. What attracted Myrtle to Tom? Huh? Not his muscles.
The way he was dressed.
Notice, she talks about, I don't like my husband because he had to borrow the suit that he was married in. It told me everything about him when that guy came to pick it up. But here, I see this guy on the train who's well-dressed, and I literally get into a cab with him after the train ride, seemingly to go hook up. And how does she explain it away? Because you can't live forever. She is just as like materialistic as Tom is. They are both fit well together because you also notice through the chapter, Myrtle is just as close-minded. She thinks she's better than everybody. She talks about those people. Earlier, one of the McKees had mentioned the word kike. Are you familiar with it? It's a derogatory word against Jewish people. And so here's Myrtle Wilson. Does she have any reason to think she's better than anybody else? No, remember where she comes from. And yet here she is walking around talking about, oh, it's the suit that attracted me. Oh, look at this apartment. Even if you just scan this next paragraph, notice that she starts to talk about, I'm going to give you this dress that I'm wearing. I don't need it anymore. Well, who probably bought this dress as well as all the others we've seen today? Tom. And then she starts to list in that paragraph all the other things she needs to go and buy. We notice that what attracts these two is that materialism, is that thought that they're better than everybody. Instead, we're going to push this along and we're going to see what happens that ends this party. Next paragraph starts, it was 9 o'clock. Almost immediately afterward, I looked at my watch and found it was 10. Mr. McKee was asleep on a chair with his fists clenched in his lap, like a photograph of a man of action. Taking out my handkerchief, I wiped from his cheek the remains of the spot of dried lather that had worried me all the afternoon. The little dog was sitting on the table, looking with blind eyes through the smoke, and from time to time groaning faintly. People disappeared, reappeared, made plans to go somewhere, and then lost each other, searched for each other, found each other a few feet away. Sometime toward midnight, Tom Buchanan and Mrs. Wilson stood face to face, discussing in impassioned voices whether Mrs. Wilson had any right to mention Daisy's name. Daisy! 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 Shouted Mrs. Wilson. I'll say it whenever I want to. Daisy! Making a short, deft movement, Tom Buchanan broke her nose with his open hand. Then there were bloody towels upon the bathroom floor, and women's voices scolding, and high over the confusion, a long broken wail of pain. Mr. McKee awoke from his doze and started in a daze toward the door. When he'd gone halfway, he turned around and stared at the scene. His wife and Catherine scolding and consoling as they stumbled here and there among the crowded furniture with articles of aid, and the despairing figure on the couch, bleeding fluently and trying to spread a copy of Town Tattle over the tapestry scenes of Versailles. So let's take a second and talk about this. What ends this party? Yep. Tom straight up smacks her across the face. Now, they describe it as like open-fisted. So don't think he makes a fist and just knuckles right across, boom. But he hits her hard enough that he busts her face open. So I also don't want you to think some movies show it as just like a slap. It's more than that. And so she's bleeding all over the place. Think about the fact that we have foreshadowed this. We described Tom as having a cruel body. We described his power. In chapter 1, Daisy talks about how her finger is bruised because Tom is a hulking figure. We see that physicality paid off here. He gets pushed, and what is it that pushes him to hit her? Yeah. She feels this right. I can remind you of your wife's name. I can say it all I want. Tom feels that guilt, shuts her up. Boom. I want to pay attention to one small detail here. One of the things that Myrtle bought as they go through the train station are magazines titled Town Tattle. And Nick sees a bunch of them lying around. What do you think a magazine titled Town Tattle is about? Gossip. Tom Buchanan is a rich, well-known New Yorker. He has a mistress and a secret apartment in the city. And he's broken her nose in a fight, a drunken fight. Is this the kind of story that would appear in a gossip magazine? And look at what they're using to clean up the blood. And the pages of the gossip magazine. They're using the gossip magazine to cover up a story that should appear in the gossip magazine. This is a great example of irony. when the expected does not happen. We would expect a story like this to be in the magazine, not for the magazine to be used to cover that story up and kind of get rid of the blood. Let's talk quickly about what happens here, because we're going to just scan the end of this. Remember that Nick is drunk. You've noticed that time continues to accelerate as the chapter goes on. Nick says it's 10, and then all of a sudden it's much later. Here, as he leaves the apartment, he leaves at roughly the same time as Mr. McKee, and then Nick blacks out, and the next thing he remembers is sitting by Mr. McKee's bed looking at photographs. And then Nick blacks out again, and in the last paragraph of the chapter, talks about being in the train station getting ready to go back home. So as we look at this chapter, each chapter of this book is primarily focused around one event. Chapter 1 was all about the dinner at Tom and Daisy's, and this is all about the party here at Tom and Myrtle's secret apartment. Here we're fleshing out the world a little bit more, but we still haven't gotten to the main question. Who is Gatsby? And what is this book really about? Tomorrow you'll begin reading chapter 3, and within that, you will see Gatsby finally. We have described him so far as this man of rumor. Bad things are associated with him. People are scared of him. We will see if that will pay off. We will also see the elaborate nature of these parties that are put on that Catherine has talked about. So take a couple of minutes to fill out the 2 questions for today.